Hello, so if you remember in the last video I introduced this idea of script files, and if you remember that script files are just so much more easier to use when you're coding more than say a couple of lines, because it allows you to actually write your code first and then R will run it all in one go. I also introduced this idea of function, and I said that functions were really useful and really important, but I didn't necessarily properly go into detail why, and that's what I'm going to do today. And I'm also going to introduce some predefined functions that are already built into R. So let's start off just by writing a function similar to what we were doing before. So let's call the function add. Okay, I'm going to tell R that I want to write a function. I've called it add, and I'm just going to write my parentheses there. And remember, in my parentheses, those are the user inputs. Okay, so those are the values which the user chooses. And I'm actually going to put them in now. So let's say I'm going to have two values. You can call them anything you like. Let's just call them X and Y, just for whatever reason. Okay, you can give them any name. It's just like the labels, which I was talking about in the first video. Press enter. Let's open and close those curly brackets. Remember what the open and close curly brackets means. It means the open bracket means start that function, close brackets means finish that function, and anything that I write between those two things will be running those functions. Okay, running that function. So let's say, okay, I'm gonna write a vector. So I'm going to call that vector v. Okay, so I'm going to combine some numbers together. Let's say the numbers I'm going to combine together. It's going to be a vector which is of length 3. There's going to be 3 elements in that vector. The first element is going to be x. Okay, so the user is going to define a value for x, and then I'm going to store that as the first element. The second element is going to be y. So again, the user is going to define a value for y, and I'm going to store that as an element. Then the third element is going to be the sum of those two x's and y's. So x plus y. That's what the third element is going to be, and I'm going to want R to print that vector v. Okay. So now, if I press source, you've seen this before, okay, and I go down here, R hasn't done anything yet other than to load that script file into its memory, into its console. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it to run the function add, the function which I've called add. So I'm going to type add, open brackets, and it automatically closes brackets. Then I need to define a value for x and a value for y. So the value for x, let's just say the value for x is going to be 5, and let's say the value for y, let's just going to say 3. Okay, press enter, and then that returns me my vector v. So my first element is my value x, okay, that's just 5. My second element is the value for y, which I've just called 3, and then the third element is going to be 5 plus 3, okay, the sum of those two elements. But let's go back up to our script file then, put a few lines in. R doesn't mind empty lines. It just reads it line by line. It doesn't care about the lines so much. It's just for me to kind of put space between those two functions. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a different function. Notice I'm writing a different function in the same script file. You'd think, kind of logically, you can only have one function per script file. That is not the case, so I'm going to show you. So let's do another function. I'm going to call this function subtract. Okay, it's going to be a function, and I'm again going to put in a couple of input values. The input values can be anything you like. I'm just call them anything you like. I'm just going to call them x and y again. Why not? Open and close those curly brackets to tell R to open and close function. And I'm going to write pretty much exactly the same thing as I wrote up here. The difference being is that the third element of my vector, which again I've called v, it doesn't matter. Even though I've called v up here, it won't interfere, as I'm going to show you in just a second. The third element, though, is going to be x subtract y, the difference of the two elements, and I'm just going to print I'm just going to print those two things. I'm just going to print my vector v. Okay, so I'm going to press source. Again, R hasn't done anything. All it's done is just loaded that script file into its memory. Okay, so this time, say for example, I want to run the function subtract. Notice that even though I've got two functions in the same R file, all I'm doing, same script file, all I'm doing in the R console is just saying run the function subtract. So run the function subtract. Let's use different values. Okay, so let's go 6 and 1. Okay, so again, it returns my first element of my vector is just my x input, which is just defined to be 6. Second element is just my y input, which is just defined to be 1. And then the third element is just 6 subtract 1. Okay, but notice now I don't have to do anything else. I've changed my mind. I actually wanted to run add, and I wanted to put it with the values 7 and 10. Okay, so now I can return that. So basically what this script file is, if you like, it doesn't matter what I put into that script file. Okay, I can have 300 functions in there if I like. And what that does, every time I press source, is it will load every single function into our memory. okay? And then I come down to my console line and I can just say to R, right, run the function add, right, run the function subtract, right, run the other functions that I've defined. So I can just select which function from this script file I want to run, okay? Now R only holds, notice I've called vector v up here, in this function here. Then I've also called vector v in this function here. So I've basically used the letter v in two different functions. Is that okay? Well, yes, it is. And also notice over here in my functions environment, in my global environment, I've just simply got the functions. I haven't got any of the values. The reason being is because now the labels, the values, my v, the thing which I call my vector, it doesn't matter. My vector v basically only lasts as long as the function lasts. So now, for example, if I come down here, okay, I type the v, okay, so v in my console, press enter, object v isn't found. The reason being is because the vector v only lasts as long as the function lasts. As soon as the function finishes, the v label is forgotten, okay, it doesn't matter. Now, I mean, if you wanted to keep hold of the vector v, there is a way of doing that. We can talk about that sort of later on. But for the moment, the thing which you've got to get in your head is that every label that you define during that function will only last as long as that function. So it means that you're not going to get a crossover, for example, okay? Every time you start a new function, you're basically turning over the page, you're starting from fresh. And so you don't have to worry about calling things different names. You don't have to worry about, well, I've called vector v something up here, so therefore I've got to call it something different down here. You don't have to worry about that, okay? It only is within that function, as long as you're calling your labels different things within that function, it doesn't matter. Now, R, conveniently, comes with some built-in functions. So we've met a few of them already. In fact, I've got some of them written up here. The function command is actually a function itself. I'm not going to delve into that too much. But the print, that's an example of a function. So what there would be is, if, for example, in our memory, I mean, I don't know what the print function looks like, but it would be set out something like this. A print takes the value of a function. Okay, I then want the user to define a value, something to put in. Okay, open and close the function, and then there'll be the jargon there which tells R what print actually means. It means, you know what print means, it just simply means print whatever that, show me what that vector looks like, show me what that value looks like, okay? But there will be a function which actually tells R that's what the user wants whenever they use print. Likewise, we've used C up here to mean combine those numbers together. So again, there'll be a function in our memory called C, takes the value of a function. Oh, sorry, can't spell function. With some user inputs, I don't know, X, Y, whatever, Z, and then there'll be open and close, and then there'll be a load of jargon in the middle, a load of code in the middle, which tells R what C actually means. It means combine those numbers together into a list. I mean, we met in the very first video, one of the first videos, this idea of a square root, so SQRT, and I said that was a function, so square root of 9 is 3. Again, that is already defined in R. So there'll be a function, if I just get rid of that, there'll be a function called SQRT, okay, which takes the value of, gets the user to put some value in. Okay, then there'll be a load of jargon in the middle there, which I don't know what that looks like, which tells R from first principles what square root actually means. It means a number times another number equals that number. What is that number? So yeah, there'll be built-in functions already within R. Now, there are also some other functions which other people have written, like, for example, they've just written a script file like this with all these different functions in that can be quite useful. So, for example, with the square root, I can now incorporate this into my, so I might create another vector, or I can even put it in this vector, where the third element is now the square root of the difference between those two values. Okay, so the square root of the difference. Now, that's really useful because now I don't have to keep on going through each time and telling R, well, what does square root actually mean? Okay, I've already got a function which you can just call up and say, all right, I know what square root means, run it through that function, and it will basically bring back the square root function. There are also some functions out there which other people have written and which you may want. So you can do a Google search and it will give you all the information on these functions, but how do you actually get those functions into your RStudio? So what you do is you go up here, you see the RStudio logo up here, you go up to the second toolbar, the file, edit, code, etc., and you go all the way along to tools. You press that, you go down into the install packages, the first option. Install from the repository. Don't worry too much about that. I think it's set to global in R. It just simply means where are you from. It's like the server which you come from. And then you type the package which you want. So for example, I've gone on the internet and I've found a nice package called circstats, which I really want to load. So I type in circstats. I click enter and it comes up down here, so it actually tells me that circstats is a recognised package. I then click install, then it will install all those packages into R. And then once I've installed it, I've already installed it, so don't worry about that. So just click install. Okay, I then click library, circstats, and what that will do is it will load the library circstats into R. So the circstats package will be loaded into R, and then I can use any of the functions within the circstats package. And actually, if you go into R, if you go onto the internet and you just type in circstats R, you notice that the first one comes up is the CRAN R project thing, and it comes up with a PDF of the package circstats, which gives you all the information that you need for all the functions of circstats. So for example, there's a function in here called alinv. No idea what that is. Inverse of A1. Oh, it's A1 inverse. Basically, it's the inverse function of the ratio of the first and zero. Yeah, don't worry too much about what it is. But basically, there's all these different functions that you can load. Let's just find one which I can find. Okay, so let's do this one. So change PT, sorry. Okay, so this is a function within the circstats. I've loaded the package in circstats. I want to use this function. So what I would do is I'll go over to the R window, so the R console. I type in change.pt. I can now use that function. It tells me the usage of that function. So I need to put an argument in. The argument is x, which is the vector of angular measurements in radians. Okay, then it gives all the details and everything I need, and it may even give me some examples. There's some which give you examples. There you go. So this would be an example of one function to use and how to use that function. So there's all this information on R, on the internet, for these functions which aren't even necessarily in R, but you can even put them in by yourself. And you can load in these packages and you can have even more functions at your disposal. So you don't actually have to code the packages each time. You can use the functions which other people have already written, which makes it really, really useful.